Greetings, I'm Yvonne Stapp for Science for the Public, and I welcome you to Contemporary Science Issues and Innovations. Global warming is accelerating and atmospheric CO2 must be reduced. But this fossil fuel industry is promoting and the government is generously funding carbon capture and storage projects that fail to reduce CO2. Our guest today is a prominent expert on this issue, Dr. Charles Harvey, professor of civil and environmental engineering at MIT, was featured in the recent PBS Frontline series, The Power of Big Oil. Today, he discusses how the fossil fuel industry continues to promote and get federal funding for carbon capture and storage. And he explains the necessity of shifting to renewable energy, which can be done now and with much less expense. Welcome, Dr. Harvey, and I thank you for joining us. And I'd like to start by asking, what is carbon capture and storage, and what's driving that? What's the background for it in terms of the CO2?
Okay, it can mean some pretty different things. What it's usually meant is capturing carbon dioxide emissions from point sources. So from power plants, factories that emit, places with smokestacks that emit high concentrations of CO2. And in the simplest sense, you sort of take the smokestack and bend it around and poke it into the ground and just have the emissions go underground and stay there. The capture is more involved because if you were to do that, you'd be also injecting a lot of other gases, a lot of nitrogen, and it's expensive to inject. So the capture part, it usually means separating the CO2 from the nitrogen or other gases so that you inject less, and then you compress it and inject it deep underground where hopefully it stays for a long time.
Yeah,
and
we'll
that's
come
the
to
sequestration or storage. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I want to make it very clear then, this is at the point of emission, not that stuff that's already loaded in the atmosphere.
Right, so there's something else called direct air capture, which is just taking the carbon dioxide out of the air. It's much more expensive.
I bet.
So it's just simple thermodynamics. It's low concentration. Therefore, there's an energetic cost to separate it that's quite high. But once you've done that, the second part is the same, compressing it and injecting it deep underground.
Okay, so you've got this heavy-duty engineering part to do no matter what. And I want to just make sure that, it seems like sequestration and storage are approximately the same thing, carbon capture, storage, and sequestration.
I think so.
Pretty much whatever it is, if somebody's heard like a different kind of thing. Okay. You wrote one of the best articles I've seen, and I think I have read everything on this subject.
Thank you.
The op-ed in the New York Times fairly recently, you captured everything all in one article. Usually you have a little bit over in this article, a little over in that article. Thank you very much for that.
There's a lot more to say.
We'll put the link for that up on the screen so that people can try to go and see this article. But it mentioned the issue, but especially the real issue behind this is what happens. So you get this carbon out of the air, CO2 out of the air, you put it in the ground, you made a very good point, you transfer it to someplace else. So you take it out of the ground, put it in the air, and then you put it like that.
Right. So the way I just described carbon capture and sequestration is you're capturing emissions before they go into the atmosphere. What is happening for the most part, certainly in the US and actually in the world overall, is the emissions that are being captured are not from power plants or from industry. They're from natural gas processing.
Yes.
So it's similar, except this carbon dioxide is millions of years old that was stored underground. It's not the result of fossil fuel burning.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. And you also mentioned that in this process, which is very expensive, it's been around, nothing has worked so far, we'll come to that, and that it actually slows the transition to renewable energy and so on. Is that the idea?
It slows the transition in a couple ways. The main point is just that if the resources, the money spent to do this, were used differently, we would reduce emissions by a lot more. But it also slows the transition politically, in that it's used to argue that we can continue to emit, continue to burn fossil fuels and solve the problem this way. But there's one thing that's kind of important here, is that what is actually happening is that it's being used for enhanced oil recovery.
Yes, thank you.
Right, so it's being injected into the ground, yes, maybe for storage, but also to push out oil.
Yes.
And then when that oil is burned, it produces more CO2 than was captured and injected into the ground. So it's net a cause of increased CO2 in the atmosphere.
That was an important point. Right.
Yeah.
The other thing, in terms of the actual engineering, this comes down, it's put into the earth, it's moved from one place to another. The whole process seems like a gigantic engineering feat. Is it not that complicated? It's causing environmental problems, but I don't know.
So it existed before we were even really worried about climate change. So the biggest project in the U.S. right now is the Chute Creek Exxon project. It existed long before there was any subsidy for doing this, because it was profitable to Exxon. So the way it's moved is that there's a gas production field, and that is pumped up, and at that site it's about 20% methane, I think 65% CO2, a small amount of helium, which is very valuable. So those gases are pumped up, separated, the helium is sold, the methane is sold as natural gas, and the CO2 is sold for enhanced oil recovery. And then it's piped from that site to an oil field and injected there to push out more oil.
Right.
So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, no, that does.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I wanted to make sure we understood that that it involves a lot of land, a lot of engineering, and everything.
Yeah. So my point is just the engineering is what the oil companies have been doing and are continue to do. You know, it's not sort of a big
new engineering
innovation.
Okay.
And the land is the land that has been used for a long time for gas and oil production.
I thought that there was an issue about that now, but maybe not. That it's
if you were
a
to
lot of people
expand
are upset. Yeah.
Yeah. If you were
that.
to expand this greatly, I don't even know how you would do that, but you would clearly have to run pipelines from the sources to other places.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you have had direct experience, which is with this engineering part, and I guess you must have started out a little more optimistic than you are now, or something.
Yeah.
Please tell us about that.
Yeah. So my background is in hydrogeology and biogeochemistry, and about 15 years ago, I thought this would be an interesting area to start to work, primarily because of my interest in doing something about climate change. And as a hydrogeologist, I know a fair amount about how fluids flow around underground, so there might be some questions about how to inject CO2 and move it around. But there weren't really actually very many interesting research questions, because as I said, the oil companies are already doing this. You know, it's not really a technical challenge to inject CO2 underground.
That's interesting.
On the other hand, there's easy research money, because all the oil companies, particularly if you're at a prestigious university,
right.
then they would fund this. So they were supporting it.
So that was the oil industries that were
funding
almost
it. All of the universities,
15
CCS,
years or so. Okay.
And still,
All
it's oil company supported. And so it wasn't particularly interesting research, but then I was working with a graduate student at Harvard, Kurt House, and he concluded the same thing. He, with a bunch of other young, sort of ambitious entrepreneurs, engineers, scientists, started this company called C12. I don't want to overstate my importance for the company. I was sort of the scientific advisor, kind of mascot. But then I worked with that company. And the big change, okay, sort of the elevator pitch at the time that they used and lots of people used, there's a lot to say about this, but one of the facts at the time was that renewable energy was quite expensive. So you could make a financial argument that if you wanted to produce power, the most efficient power that is emission-free, the most efficient thing would be carbon capture and sequestration. What happened over time, just in years, it's just a remarkable thing. The cost of solar, wind, energy storage just plummeted. So the elevator pitch is gone. We can't go to someone and say, we have the tools to reduce your emissions most efficiently. We could do it the hard way, the expensive way, but there's a better way to do it. And then so I think the company may still exist in some sort of ghostly state as an enhanced oil recovery company now.
But in your experience, did you come to any conclusions about how effective that technology actually was? So because the accumulation of the CO2 is accelerating all this time, right?
Yeah.
And this captures what's coming out of the pipes, but as it's being produced. Did you come to any conclusions at that time about the real efficacy of that technology of CCS?
Yeah. So like I said before, you can inject CO2 into the ground. We know that. You can separate CO2 from nitrogen, or if you other sources like ethanol production produces almost pure CO2. So you can capture that. And in principle, those things we could calculate the costs of those as principally the energy requirements to do those different things. In practice, all evidence is that the practical costs are really quite high, because almost all of the projects that attempt to do this have failed, and the amounts of money they've spent before failing are quite high. It makes it kind of hard to calculate how much it would cost, because they spent a lot of money and they never injected any. But it certainly sort of sets,
By failure.
Yeah.
What do you?
I don't mean that they didn't necessarily blow up. They didn't. So the biggest one is probably the Kemper project in Mississippi.
Okay.
And it was it's clean coal.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
So something between $7 and $8 billion was spent on this, and it's not all spent for the carbon capture and sequestration part, right? It's spent also to make it into a power plant, but a lot of money. It's hard to separate, but
it is a lot of money.
A lot of money was spent on the carbon capture and sequestration. It's not that it failed; it never was turned on. And then there's a great video. It was literally blown up on purpose. It was demolished right before the Infrastructure Act was signed, which contains about $12 billion for more projects.
Right. You
just
think
like
you
this.
mentioned.
Yeah, we had that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there go the gazillions of dollars, and we don't have anything, and we're right back where we started, evidently. Okay.
Yeah.
So you did know the technology, the whole business, and how effective, if anything, it would have been, even if renewable had not progressed suddenly, rapidly. It just seems like this might have been very limited anyway. I'm not sure, because there's a whole lot of CO2 out there.
Right. We're never going to find out because the economics are so bad for it that we're not going to. No one argues anymore that this should be built for power plants.
Right.
I have not. We got. I can tell you sort of pushback we got in the New York Times article. We were really pleased and surprised that we didn't get pushback on that, because that's our main point, is that it should not be built for power generation, which is the largest industrial source of emissions. So, yeah, so it's not going to become large. So I don't think we're going to find out.
Okay, well, in a word.
Yeah. Technically, it can be done. The issues are financially, I don't know.
Will be the financial end, and then the actual effectiveness, how much of it's going to, if we even keep going with oil and gas and so on now, which is what they want to do.
Well, you get what I'm saying? In principle, it could be used, to eliminate emissions, but that would be ridiculous to do.
Yes.
Because we can eliminate those emissions at a fraction of the cost in other ways.
Right, and then we want to definitely come to that. Okay, so despite this record just recently, the government has been funding this or subsidizing it for a long while. So I think you said that the oil industry started out doing the funding, but this has now, it's subsidized to a very large extent, funded by the taxpayer, and I don't think the taxpayers know what's going on here.
Probably not. It's pretty complicated.
It's very complicated, deliberately, I would say. But in any case, the government continues this. So the question is, why? Is that due to a very powerful, I think everybody knows this, fossil fuel lobby? And then there's the other thing of just how smart are these people in government that they're doing something that.
These are good. Yeah, I don't know the answer to the second one for sure. But so one of the pushbacks we got in our article was basically, you guys are naive. You don't understand how legislation is made. Mm-hmm. No, we're not. I don't think.
You're not.
Well, we are naive, but maybe we're not that dumb. So this was clearly to get Joe Manchin's vote.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's not a coincidence that he gets more funding from fossil fuel industries than any other senator.
Right. That's very well established. I think now.
So that's what's going on here now. How much and different policymakers know that it's just buying them off, or they might think that there are aspects of it that are good. I don't know. That would be interesting to talk to.
Yes, we're not getting an answer in this regard at all.
But it served its purpose. It got the IRA through.
It did.
And 90% of the IRA is fantastic.
You
it's the
think
best
that's
thing we've done for climate ever.
Okay, that has come out many, many times. And then the other side of that is, and then the oil industry got what it wanted there, and a lot of money, just a huge amount of money.
A huge amount of money, but actually a small portion of the total IRA.
You're very optimistic. Okay, that's good. And may I just very quickly then ask why you're impressed with this, the IRA, then why is it just so good? I know it's more than anything we've ever had before, but in certain respects.
So one way I'd put it is economists will tell you, and I'm sure they're right, the most efficient way to reduce emissions is a carbon tax, right? Because then you just penalize things exactly proportional to how much they put into the atmosphere. And then all the industry, engineer, everyone can sort of figure out how to do that. For political reasons, we can't have a carbon tax. But what's become apparent over the last 10 years is that renewable energy combined with energy storage is the efficient way to do it. So by subsidizing those, you basically achieve the same result as a carbon tax, and it's politically palatable. And those in the IRA are subsidized more than the oil company.
So you think they might win on that side in the end? That might be a possibility.
There's all kinds of challenges with power transmission and everything. But this is going to help help a lot, I think, to basically build wind and solar energy.
So the taxpayer is
and EVs, right?
Yes, a big movement now. That's a good thing. The other thing here is that the population, the taxpayer is paying a huge amount for all of this, but you are optimistic then that a lot of that money is going in the right direction under the IRA.
Yes, I think the money
Okay.
going for renewables is the right direction.
Okay, right,
Yeah.
right. But I mean, it's not being trampled on the side there by the fossil fuel industry with the piece of cake given to them in that.
Yeah. So I think
act.
that is certainly a waste of resources, and to the extent that it's going to subsidize enhanced oil recovery, which I think it largely is.
Yes.
It's completely counterproductive.
Yes.
It's actually
right.
increasing emissions.
That's the point.
But I don't think it'll increase emissions as much as the other parts of the bill will reduce
Okay.
emissions.
And before we leave that, then we really need to do something else to get the excess CO2 out of the atmosphere. This is not sufficient. We have a super huge problem with that.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to do some other kind of engineering to extract what's already in the atmosphere.
Yes. Okay. But I think it's an important point here, not very similar to what I've been saying. If you have $1 billion to spend right now, you should spend it on not putting it into the atmosphere.
Oh, absolutely.
And so,
Point
yes, we
taken,
need to
definitely.
do that. And we need to figure out how to do it. But we don't want to spend large resources on this. We don't want to start building sort of industrial carbon capture machines at great expense when that's just a silly way.
Yeah, my question there was really was whether it was doable. So you have
doable
this
is
one
fine.
thing. At the end of the day, the problem is already in the atmosphere.
Right,
Stop now, and we're
I mean, it's
decades or whatever down the line.
Is it doable? It's just going to be a matter of...
That was the thing. It's another kind of topic,
how much,
I suppose.
And I don't think we know. There's huge scientific questions
yes.
that I would love to be involved in working on.
Are you thinking of it? To do it?
Oh, yeah, that's what I've been working on for the last 10 years. I don't do...
Oh, okay. You don't do this stuff. So you talk. Because that is the other issue that, what are we going to do down the line? We're already seeing an emergency situation. So the thing is, I think we mentioned before, but government representatives, some of them are sworn to one side or the other, in this whole issue, but you often get the impression that these people are not well informed about a number of issues that involve science today, and that's the core of everything. In order to govern today, you really need to know something. So you need to be aware of the information on these things, and they have people to help out, don't they? I mean, to inform them.
I'm sure.
I would think, right? But you have this problem, from now and then, about they don't seem to be really aware of the issue, the way that they treat these things. So that's that. Okay, do you think that professional engineers like yourself, do you think that the professional population that can do something, do you think they are able to influence the policymakers to change the things? Change the situation.
Okay.
So we have this urgent situation.
Can I give kind of a long and meandering answer
Yes,
to that?
right. Be careful, we have 5.
Okay, so one of the ways that carbon capture and sequestration is promoted is that climate change is an enormous problem. Emissions are still increasing. We need to do all of the above to solve this problem. And that sounds appropriately ambitious and sort of optimistic, but it's wrong, okay? And that thinking, a lot of engineers and sort of
people, scientists, the whole community.
Say that.
Yes.
And promote that. Now, so why is that wrong? Okay. So first of all, obvious thing is that where the subsidies are going and what we're doing right now is enhanced oil recovery. It doesn't belong in all of the above because it actually increases emissions. Okay, and then the second thing is that it's dumb to do all of the above. You should do the parts of all of the above that are the most efficient use of your limited resources.
Okay.
Right. So that's the second way it's wrong. Now, we didn't have time, but I didn't get sort of the major pushback on our article is what about the hard to decarbonize sectors, cement, steel, things like that.
Yes,
and I could talk about that for a long time.
Yeah,
There's a lot of interesting stuff.
Another one.
And it's possible that some of those we will do carbon capture. We should do carbon capture. It's possible,
yes.
but we don't know. But as long as the subsidies are for producing CO2 and injecting it into the ground, those subsidies are going to prevent clever techniques that never produce the CO2 to begin with. Right? Because you can't.
Right.
So I think the engineers and scientists who promote their research in these areas, by giving something like that all of the above justification, have some of the responsibility to also say, but we disagree with enhanced oil recovery.
Yes, okay.
Right, because that's sort of lost. So a politician might read this sort of all of the above argument and say, well, this is great. Let's put more money into the 45Q.
Yes,
Right? But it's not, there are no cement carbon capture and sequestration projects in the world right now. So the money's not going to that. It's going
only
to
one thing, only this one thing. Likewise, things in agriculture, other big sources of CO2 emission, this is not handling. Right, just this one thing. I hope that the professionals have more voice in this. They need it. You appeared recently in a Frontline series about the oil industry, and there were a number of other people in this three-part so far series as well. So that's one way of getting it out, at least to the public, and you hope that representatives and government are paying attention to it too.
And you should watch the British version of it, the BBC version. It's different. It's a different cut.
Yes, that it often is, but I will check. That's very interesting. Thank you for the point. I'll look that up for sure. And before we close, let me ask you one more thing. So there's a question of whether you, the professionals, can have any influence on the policymakers. You can't say stop this very easily, even though it depends on science itself. And then is there anything that the voters can do, ordinary mortals, to put an end to this proliferation of CO2? What?
Vote and mobilize the vote.
Have you heard about the gerrymander and a few other things? Come on.
I know. It's just the political fight. I mean,
Exactly. No, I bring that up and almost as a joke, because there are people that will say, it's up to you, voters and things like this, but the voters clearly feel powerless today.
Right, and they're misinformed. So, I mean, it's interesting to see sort of the climate denial
community, that
shifting, so I don't pay enough attention to it, probably, but there's incredible sort of misleading advertisements about, one of my favorite ones is Saudi Aramco ran a full-page ad in The Economist about how they were building fleets of trucks that would have little carbon capture and sequestration units on the truck, would capture the exhaust, separate it, compress it, and then when the truck went to fill up for diesel, it could also drop off its CO2 a convenient injection and storage place. So, to an engineer, you read this, you sort of do the calculations, how much energy, and it's pretty ridiculous. But, average person might see that and think, problem solved.
The big issue, I think a lot of people now feel very concerned about this situation. It's so obvious we have a problem now, but they feel very paralyzed. They feel like they can't actually do anything, and they really are limited. So the voters who can vote, get out and vote, but they that's the situation. They're not able to really have an impact on the whole thing. I am sorry, we are out of time. This was most enjoyable. I could go on for days. Right.
Right.
Maybe we could pick it up another time. But
Yeah.
Dr. Harvey, thank you ever so much for your very great input here. Thank
Great.
you.
Well, thank you for having me.